Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Leading Hope. Man, I'm excited to be here with you, Kevin. Are you excited?
I'm excited to be here with you, VJ.
That's great. And Matt's with us, too, today, but he's over by the computer. And you can hear him just now, but it's going to be a good day. Man, I'm excited that everyone's joining us today. But hey, welcome. You are listening to the Leading Hope podcast. My name is VJ Williams, here with my friend and pastor Kevin Jack. Thank you for joining us and taking time out of your day to become a better leader. If you're new, we release a new episode every Wednesday. The easiest way to remember that is to hit that subscribe button. What do you always laugh at that part?
Every week.
Yeah, it is. Because
the easiest way to remember that is it's Wednesday.
It is Wednesday. And if you hit the subscribe button, you won't have to worry about what
the easiest way to remember that
day it is
to know your days of the week.
That's it. But if you hit the subscribe button, you don't have to know what day of the week is because YouTube and Facebook will remind you.
We're already in mid-podcast form, folks. That's right.
Don't forget to share it with a friend on YouTube and Instagram. Also, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts. A few extra minutes will absolutely help get this podcast in the hands of more leaders just like you. And visit leadinghope.online. Updates and find out more about the Leading Hope community. Kevin, we are in episode 9-2. You've titled this Stories Worth Telling.
So today, next week is the next week is the one that I just need to know, this is you're going to need to tag 1,000 friends. You'll need to, because next week what we're diving into is how to tell a story. But this is almost the prequel to that, to set it up. I can give you tips on how to tell a story, but it really doesn't matter if you're not telling a story that is worth telling. So we've been in this storytelling vision casting series for, 6 episodes, something like that now. And we've spent a lot of time dealing with understanding context, understanding meta-narrative, connecting the dots, all these other pieces. And this is one of the most fundamental pieces, because if you're an incredible storyteller, but you're not telling a story that is worth telling, it doesn't matter. I say that again, it doesn't matter. So I want to walk through and just be able to show you, how do you know if you have a story that is worth telling? And this is a leadership podcast, okay? So this is not if you're looking to do stand-up at the local comedy club. This is how you know if your stories were telling, although I do think it's actually applicable there. This is as you understand the stories that you tell as a leader, whether it's in a brief moment, whether it's in front of your team, whether it's in a long talk that you're doing, should I include this story or not? I want to show you, hey, what matters most about the stories that you're telling. So first off, this is what does not work. The story that you should not tell is simply, here's what happened. Whenever your story is merely a repetition of the events that took place, I want you to know that no one cares. So if you come up to me and you say, is that too harsh?
I don't know.
All right.
We'll find out.
If you come up to me and you go, do you want to look at my vacation photos? I will answer, I will look at a photo. You can show me one picture.
One.
But I do not care to hear the entire itinerary of events of where you did and what happened. And I use that somewhat facetiously. I use that somewhat as a joke in terms of, but I want to say it like this. The majority of the stories that leaders tell are merely talking about the activity that took place. And so it's just we did this. It went well. We did this. People had fun. And then when they talk about future events, it's, we're going to do this. We hope you come.
We hope it's fun.
We hope it's fun. We hope it goes well.
Yeah.
And just to say, there's no power in that. That is not worth telling. One of the things that I'm going through at length with my kids right now is they want to tell me all the funny moments from the TV shows that they watch. They're just in that stage, you're never going to believe. And they will, if you would ask them today, how does your dad respond when you tell them about events from a TV show? Their response will be, he doesn't care because he doesn't care about the show. Yeah. Here you go. Kevin, you're a harsh father. I want to teach my kids how to understand what our story's worth telling. So this is what I want to switch, is typically when we think story, we think event, okay? So you go, a story is about an event that took place, and if I'm going to tell a story, my responsibility is to communicate the details of that event. And I need that to shift in our brain, okay? Because if you're going to tell stories worth telling, you're no longer going to be thinking event. When you think of what is a story that is worth telling, you need to think of the word transformation, okay? Something that changed, something especially within you, what you thought, what you valued, how you viewed the world, how you viewed yourself, something that became different, that was impacted by an event that took place. But this is the so important shift that has to happen, is so often we just think story equals event. And you go, hey, you may have like a fun anecdote. You may have an interesting tidbit. You may have a cool photo from a neat scene when you went on vacation. But that's not a story worth telling. Now, I'm not saying you can never share your vacation photos, because I'm sure someone out there does care about your vacation photos. Is it you?
It depends on who it is, I guess.
Okay, there we go. Probably, maybe VJ. It's not me. It's not me. You can share your fun anecdote, your interesting tidbit. Like, that's fine. I just don't want you to think that those are the powerful stories that are worth telling. Again, so no one thinks that I'm just ridiculous and a jerk and everything like that. Like, those have a place, but the biggest shift that has to happen is that when we think story, we don't think event, we think transformation. And so this is what you need. Like, when someone shares about, it could be a trip that they went on. It could be a conversation they had. It could be someone that they met. It could be a near-death experience. The thing that is the most powerful is how they are different because of having gone through that, because of experiencing that. Even the worst storyteller in the world has a hard time botching a story about how they've been transformed, because the focus of the story, as long as they keep the focus of the story on their personal transformation and not merely the events that took place. So this is what I want to do, is I want to give you just a couple pointers on this to hopefully flesh out this idea so you can see a little more clearly, okay, so these are the things that we're looking for in stories that are really worth telling. And then I want to live this out with an example on how you tell someone else's story and what that actually looks like. So what is included in stories worth telling? Always confession. Confession is always included in stories that are worth telling. An acknowledgement of what you didn't know, of what you were unaware of what you were too arrogant of. You mentioned Matt's here over there, not in a camera. I ask Matt every Saturday, we have services on Saturday, for feedback on the message. And he will sometimes reorder my content. He'll sometimes say, hey, it kind of died here. You need to move forward on this. We'll get into that stuff next week on how to tell a story. But the most common thing that he'll share with me is he knows it to a T. If it goes, hey, I don't know how you struggle with this. And I don't care about how I struggle with this until I know how you struggle with this. There is something powerful that takes place when you begin to own where you're not there yet. Now, let me put as a side note in this, okay? Or this is kind of really the second thing. It needs confession. Stories worth telling also need humility. No one wants to hear, and that's when I learned just how tough I was. And that's when I learned how big of a jerk my boss really is. And I should be running the department to begin with. I don't care about that story. No one wants to listen to that. We want to hear how you were impacted through what you've gone through, how you are different. In most stories, they spend so much time talking about the events and what you realized in others, and they never get to what you realized in yourself. And that is where the power of story lies, how you're transformed, how you're different. Now, let me take a little bit of a shift, but I'm going to do this in order to live out this context, and then we'll see what all you have and what all you want to jump into.
Okay.
And that's this idea, is when you tell someone else's story, when you're sharing someone else's story, your role in that is to share how their story transformed you, how you were impacted by the things that they went through in the realizations that they had. And in doing so, you keep transformation at the center of the story, which is always interesting, which is always compelling, and is worth telling. And you also allow them to live out their story without you taking an unnecessary role in it. So here's what I mean by that. So VJ's story.
Yep. Oh.
Ready?
No.
Yeah, he didn't know this was coming.
Where are we going?
So this was good. So I'm just going to live this out, okay?
Yeah, live
and
it
you
out.
can correct anything.
Nope.
And I'm going to keep it a little general.
Good.
Good. So a lot of VJ's story is about being apathetic in his faith, not caring at all, going through some rote motions, just some normal routines, but it being generally lifeless and reasonably judgmental through that.
Oh.
Through some unique circumstances and a significant low point in his life, he encountered God in a profound way. His marriage was on the rocks at the time. And his statement to his wife was, I asked him once, I said, VJ, how did you get your wife to trust you, to believe you, that you're different? And his response was, you don't have to believe me, just watch me. And that is what he has lived out then from then, is the new creation that he has found being in Jesus and how his life has been transformed in that. And as I've watched that in his life, it has made me realize how much of my faith I have disregarded, that I reduced my faith down to simple routines, principles, and things that I could control. And all of a sudden, I had this whole other category that I couldn't explain of the things that God does that can't be explained because we had no power or control in it. And I've had this living embodiment beside me through our lives, through the office, on this podcast, of how God transforms and redeems, that stands as a marked reminder in my life that there is no one who I should disregard. And there is not just a simple set of principles we should adopt, but that in our lives we need to actually encounter Jesus. Now, first off, that's what we celebrate.
Yeah.
I don't want to make this such a leadership podcast and so focused on leadership that we miss that every word that I just said was true.
Yeah.
Okay. And we believe that. But I also want to share within this is to go, I'm not just sharing VJ's story. I've been impacted by his story. And so I don't leave that out. I don't just share, here's VJ's story and man, gosh darn it, isn't that cool?
Yeah.
That's neat. I go, no. Watching this, even hearing this, has impacted me. It makes me think of this. It makes me realize this. And so when you keep transformation at the center, this is what stories are about. I don't emphasize a single event in his account. I emphasize the transformation. And I don't emphasize the event of me first hearing the story. I emphasize how I've been transformed by seeing this, by hearing it, and by watching him live it out. I know that was a lot, and I know there was some stuff in there that you weren't prepped for us to head into. But what do you want to talk about? Do you want to talk about story stuff? Do you want to talk about?
I think this is super powerful for everyone. First of all, we know some people are better at telling stories than others, in general.
Agreed.
Like that, and that sounds obvious, but we know when we say that statement, you know that person that tells a really good story.
Yep.
And then you know the other person that you know who's going to approach you. You love these people. Either way, you love them. But
Yes.
You're like, oh, here it comes. I'm going to be stuck in the next half hour, and and all they could have told me was the last two sentences.
Yep.
And so I think the powerful part of this is exactly what you said, which is, man, even when you told that, you didn't get to the part about you until the very end, but turned it back on Jesus, who's the real hero of the entire story.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you can use I in your stories as long as I leads to someone else.
Oh, that's so important. Oh, that's so good.
Like that is what I heard the whole time you were talking. You're like, okay, he did this. He was bad dude. This now, Jesus comes in. Jesus comes into my life as well in a different way. I never knew he could.
Yeah.
But right, you can use me and him and who and you and all that, but someone is getting glory for this.
Yep.
And it better not be us.
So if we take it back, oh, that's so good. That really, V, that's so good and powerful.
Yeah, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Somebody's getting the glory, and it can't be the people telling the story.
And the thing that you said,
That
if
rhymed.
we take it like really practical, the thing that you said at the very beginning of like, we all know people who like, there's people you go, I got a story for you. And you're like, oh, come on, I can't wait to hear. And someone's like, I got a story for you. And you check your watch and you're like, I've only got 3 minutes. And you almost want to tell them that to begin with. Yeah. Listen, I got 3 minutes. And here's the deal. Like, if you begin the story, you go, hey, let me tell you about the time that I realized that I'd become arrogant. Or let me tell you about the time that I realized that I wasn't living up to what I was meant to be as a husband and a father.
Yeah.
Let me tell you about the time when I realized my parents really did love me. You go, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Like, you're leaning in. You're ready to go. If you go,
so
hey, let me tell you about the time that we drove all the way out to Arizona in one night. You're like,
yeah.
All right, it's probably going to be a lot of time in the car.
Yeah.
And so often we focus on activity instead of transformation. And here's my... If I can just say, here's my big push, especially this podcast goes out to a lot of people. We're in church. We're church leaders.
Yeah.
And to go, if you're not emphasizing, like within church, as a church leader, your pastor, your Hope team member, your volunteer in a different church, like whatever that is, if you're not emphasizing transformation, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's right there. It's the most compelling story that there is. How are you missing that in any way?
Yeah, that's so good. You mentioned at the very beginning, I have some notes written down, but you mentioned it has to be, the story has to be transformative. The transformation has to occur in order for the story to have legs.
Yeah.
And by what I mean by that is that it will move from person to person. More people will want to tell your story when it's transformative. And you just said something changed. It doesn't have to be. You said I think a deathbed story like every time. It doesn't have to be that, but something in the story has to change. It was this. It is no longer that. It is now this.
Yeah.
And I think we forget about that when we tell stories. And if we can put that in the front half of our brain when we're starting to tell someone about what we're talking about, I think we will find that we become better storytellers.
Yeah.
And I know that for my life, you're exactly right. Nobody wants to. All right, so nobody wants to hear me talk about my heydays as a high school captain of the basketball team. Like, to me, it was really awesome.
Yeah.
Like, to me, it was really awesome time in my life, right? Captain, high school, Beaver Creek basketball team, won the WOL. Big, yeah, it was awesome. Nobody cares about that.
Nobody cares.
But you know when they're leaning in? When I tell them I was an awful husband and an awful dad.
Yeah. And it doesn't even, what you said, oh, that's so important because we want to tell the stories of when we were at our best.
Yeah.
And people need to hear the stories about when we became better without realizing it. So, like, Monday, I'm at a softball tournament. We've just played. I've played terribly. The team played not great. I'm standing there at the exit to go out, and a guy who was wearing a shirt from the church that I was a part of planning starts walking out. And I said, hey, are you from so-and-so? And I didn't know who he was. I was going to introduce myself. I was excited to meet him and hear his story. And he just said, yep, put his head down and kept on walking. And it made me remember back when I was there were people, and I didn't believe this, but there were people who were saying, hey, without you here, it's not going to keep going well. Without you here, it's not going to keep running. And I didn't believe that, but there's always a part of you that kind of wants that to be true, to go how important I was. And all of a sudden, I had the greatest reminder that I will ever need in my life about how unimportant my presence is and that God can keep doing exactly what he set out to do without me there. Because here was a man who had been impacted by the foundation I had set, had no idea who I was, the role I played in his story, and did not care a lick.
Yeah.
And that's incredibly humbling to see what God continues to do and how unimportant you are at times, and yet he invites you into the process.
That's so good, man. I tell you, this has been a great episode for understanding what it looks like to be a story, telling stories that are worth it. Anything else you want to add to episode 92?
Let's just close out with this. The idea is to say, hey, transformation stories don't have to happen on a deathbed. They can happen in a parking lot.
Yeah.
It can be a simple thing. But when you think story, you must shift from details of the event to details of the transformation, because those are stories that are always worth telling.
That's awesome. Episode 92, Stories Worth Telling. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. If you're new to the podcast or haven't yet subscribed, it'd be great if you did that now. It'd mean the world to us. Also, post about it, rate, and review. I'm not kidding when I say every time you do that, it actually helps move this podcast into more hands and more people are listening just like you. Leaders everywhere can get this content and join the conversation with us as well. We love hearing your stories of how the podcast is working in your life and business. If you have a story, visit leadinghope.online and send that to us. We would love to hear from you. And remember, everyone has 20 minutes to learn to become a better leader. Make it count.